Good afternoon. Welcome to Condo Insider, and I'm Jane Sugimura, and I'm your host today. We are broadcasting from our studio in the ThinkTech live streaming network from Pioneer Plaza in downtown. And joining me in the studio today is Dana Bergman of Bergeman Project Group. And today we're going to be talking about repairing condominiums. And this is a show about association and condo living. And we know that at least a third of the population of the state live in condominiums. So we hope that the information that we bring to you will be useful. Right now, I'd like to introduce my guest, Dana Bergman.
Aloha, and thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you. Dana, can you tell me a little bit about your company? What do you do?
My firm is a project management and consulting firm, and we specialize in helping condominiums and AOAOs with significant capital improvement projects.
And when you say capital improvement projects for a lay person, because board members are lay people, what are you talking about?
We work predominantly on larger projects. So if a condo is working on something very, very small, you don't need someone like myself or my firm or someone like us to assist you. You know, if you're just replacing let's say a gate, you don't need us for that. We do larger scale things like roofing replacement, spall repair, railing and window replacement, pipe replacement, all those large scale things that don't come up all that often.
And you know, an interesting side note, you own a condominium, right?
I do.
And you have served on the board.
Still do.
Oh, you still do? You're
Yes.
still a board member?
President of the board.
Oh, okay. So you speak as a board member, a condominium owner, and a consultant.
Glutton for punishment.
Okay. How did you get involved in your association?
I originally got involved in my association because of a problem with our budget and a large capital improvement project. We were relatively new owners and found out that there was a problem with, in our case, it was our windows, and that they were falling out of the building and hitting the parking deck or the pool deck. The jalousie glass was falling out and wasn't in our reserve study. And so at that point in time, I got involved, and eventually I became the president of the board and still am.
Well, you know, you were talking about how, you know, your company doesn't get involved in the day-to-day repairs.
No, our job is to look out for the association's interests and help the associations arrive at a successful outcome with these large projects. We're not contractors. That's not what we do. Our job is to help get you from A to B or from start to finish, depending on how you want to look at it, and help you manage all the parts and pieces that go into one of these large capital improvement projects. People think it's really simple, but it's not. You know, I'm fond of saying it's like, you know, our role is like the hub of the wheel. The wheel does not work without a hub, and it also doesn't work with all the spokes. And our job is to make sure that all the spokes are in place so that we have a successful project. And those spokes can be, you know, the condo owners themselves, the board, the bank, the insurance agent, the contractors, the architects, the engineers, it runs the gamut.
And well, let's talk about, you know, the people who do repairs. You said you don't do the small jobs, but you sit on the board. And the board is in charge of maintaining and doing repairs for the building.
That's correct.
Right? So how do you go about selecting your contractors?
So whether you're looking at a large project or a small project, the process is basically the same. You want to make sure that you're looking at using licensed and insured contractors. Those are the first two things you want to look at. The licensure needs to be applicable to the type of work that the contractor proposes to do. And you know, some contractors are very good about being upfront about that, some contractors are not. So that's the first thing you want to look at, is their licensure. All that information is available on the DCCA website and the PVL website, and you can look that up easily in just a few minutes online.
And property managers in town, most property managers know how to do that.
Yes, your property manager should know how to look that information up. If even a board member could look it up. It's very simple. You just go to the DCCA website, type in the name of the contractor, and you can see their information.
And you can find out who their insurance company is.
You can, in most cases, find out some things about their insurance, yes. And one important point about insurance, and most people don't know this, is there's a lot of contractors that have an exclusion for multifamily, which is AOAO projects, condo projects, that they can't do condo work. And yet we see day in and day out these contractors doing condo work when in fact they don't have insurance for that. So another thing you should look at, whether it's a small project or a large project, is making sure that you have the contractor provide verification that they do in fact have insurance applicable to condo work.
And let's say you hire a contractor, he doesn't have insurance, and he or his workers get hurt on your property. Who then pays for those bills?
That's when I call you. It really becomes problematic. When you do your homework from the start and you make sure that you've dotted those I's and crossed those T's, you minimize the board and the association's risks, and you minimize the board and the association's potential liabilities. And I can tell you from experience, both small projects and large, that we've gotten drug into after the fact, that it can be quite an expensive and difficult proposition to fix those problems when things like that occur.
And so if there is no insurance, it's probably the association who's going to have to pick up those bills.
It's probably the association.
Right. What if one of the board members has an Uncle Joe who's a contractor, and he says, oh, well, we want to save money, and Uncle Joe will do it cheap. What's your response to that?
We need a whole nother show for me to tell you the horror stories that I have seen over the years with this scenario. First and foremost, there's nothing wrong with referring someone to the project. So I don't want to dissuade someone from necessarily referring a quality contractor. The problem we see regularly is that you'll have someone on the board that has a cousin or a family member or even a very close friend who says, hey, I can get you a great deal. And the problem is that it sets up a very big conflict of interest. As a board member in my association or any other, you want to make sure that you're operating with good fiduciary responsibility and that you're disclosing potential conflicts. So if someone does refer a family member or a close friend, they definitely need to disclose that information to their fellow board members and likely recuse themselves from voting on the matter. My personal experience is, generally speaking, when this scenario comes up, it's not because someone referred one of the larger, more known contractors. It's usually when someone has referred a one-man show or a handyman service to do something that's just beyond their capabilities, and it really turns into to be quite a mess.
And if a board member does refer a family member or a classmate or something like that, that could be the basis for a claim if the job is, if it's not completed right, or if for some reason there are defects and then there's a lawsuit, or if somebody is hurt because of the defect and then the association is sued, the board member who made that referral might not be covered under the association's errors and omissions policy.
That's correct. That is my understanding in talking with the insurance agents and the insurance folks around town, that is, in such a scenario, the association's directors and officers policy may not cover it.
So that's another reason why board members should refrain from suggesting that Uncle Joe or their brother-in-law or their classmate from college somehow should do this job.
I completely agree. My suggestion would be to just steer clear of that and let your property manager assist you if it's a small project. If it's a large project, get someone like myself or one of my fellow colleagues from other firms in town to help.
You were mentioning a reserve study. Can you explain what a reserve study is?
Yeah, so now we're diving from construction world into property management world. The reserve study is essentially your roadmap and your guide for all the major expenses that your association is going to have. Everything from, say, pool equipment, all the way to very, very large-scale capital improvements like pipe replacement. Everything goes in the reserve study. It is your Bible, it is your roadmap, it is your guide for your association's capital improvements finances.
And who prepares this?
Normally it's prepared by a reserve study specialist. Sometimes you will get them directly from the property managers. Either way, it is the law in Hawaii that you do have to have a reserve study. It is such a critical document. I can't stress enough the importance of making sure that you have a good reserve study and that it is regularly updated.
And, I know from serving on, my boards that in the beginning I didn't understand what a reserve study was. And most people like me who serve on boards are lay people. We're not involved in construction. So can you explain to the listening audience what goes into the reserve study? What kind of information goes into it?
Yeah, reserve study, it is a living, breathing, working tool. It is not a static document that you do once in a while, put in a folder and never think about. If you're just putting your reserve study in a folder and setting it aside until next year, you're setting yourself up for a problem. You need to be constantly referring to and constantly updating that reserve study. As I said, everything goes into that reserve study that you may need: pool equipment, spall repair, windows, railings, the carpet in the hallways, repainting the inside, repainting the outside. All of these things need to go into the reserve study. And the old expression, garbage in, garbage out, nowhere is it more true than with reserve studies. When you hire one of the reserve study specialists, they can only do so much. And they basically put the data about your, basic data about your building into some computer software program. And out the other end comes a reserve study, and a lot of boards just kind of take that as gospel and put it in the file drawer. That is not the purpose, in my opinion, of a reserve study. You need to take it and scrutinize it and criticize it to make sure that you're getting everything you could possibly need in there. Why? The problem is, if it's not in your reserve study, it means you don't have the money saved for whatever capital improvement may be coming down the road. And one of the most extreme examples in recent years has been waste piping replacement. That's probably the hottest topic in town right now. And 5 years ago, as I would look at reserve study after reserve study after reserve study, nobody had this in their reserves. And we're talking about, on most buildings in Honolulu, multi-million-dollar projects. So if you don't have that money in there and you haven't been saving for that over time, and all of a sudden you're faced with this major capital expenditure, you've got a problem. So this is why looking at the reserve study and updating it constantly and asking tough questions about it is important, because you want to make sure you get everything in there that may need to be in there. I can give you one more example real quick, if I may.
Okay.
Another recent favorite example is with painting. When I look at reserve studies almost always have painting of the exterior of the building in the reserve study. But as some of the older buildings in Honolulu have been painted and painted and painted again, unfortunately, we've reached a point now where many buildings simply can't be painted again if you want to have a warrantable paint job. They actually have to be scraped. I almost never see scraping in the reserve studies when I look at them. And here's the problem. Painting a building is a few dollars a square foot, depending on what kind of paint you use and how fancy the paint job ends up being. But scraping the old paint off the building can be, $10, $15, even $20 a square foot, depending on the scenario. So if you only have a couple of dollars, let's say as an example, in your reserve study for paint, but you've got a 50 or a 55-year-old building that's got multiple layers on it that are not adhering correctly, you have not only a warrantability problem with your proposed new paint job, you have a potential financial problem as well. That's why the reserve studies are so important.
Okay, well, with the reserve study, the boards, so you're saying that the board should be using the reserve studies to plan their capital improvement projects?
Absolutely. That is the roadmap for capital improvements.
Okay, we're going to take a few-minute break. This is Condo Insider, and I'm Jane Sugimura. My guest today is Dana Bergman, and we'll be back in a few minutes.
Hi, I'm Ethan Allen, host of Likeable Science here on ThinkTechHawaii.com. I hope you'll join me every Friday at 2 p.m. to discover what's likable about science.
Aloha, my name is Richard Emery, host of Condo Insider. More than a third of Hawaii's population live in some form of association, and our show is all about educating board members and owners about their responsibilities and obligations and providing solutions for a great association. You can watch me live on Thursdays, 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. each week. Aloha.
Aloha, I'm Kirsten Baumgart-Turner, and I'm fortunate to be able to host Sustainable Hawaii at ThinkTechHawaii.com. I hope you'll join in with us every Tuesday from 12 noon to 1 p.m. to see the interesting people we have to share with you their information. Aloha.
You're watching Think Tech Hawaii, offering lifelong learning from passionate hosts and fascinating guests, ready to explore and explain Hawaii's place in the 21st century. Great content for Hawaii from Think Tech.
Okay, we're back. My name is Jane Sugimura, and this is Condo Insider. And my guest today is Dana Bergman, and we're talking about repairing condominiums, preserving and protecting the assets, I think was what Dana told me off air. And I think that's a good way to think about it, preserving and protecting the assets of the condominium. And that's pretty much why we have to do these repairs. And I want to just add one more thing to the reserve study, is that the reserve study, although it's prepared by an expert, you do need the experience and the information of the condo members, the board members, to prepare that report. What kind of input do they provide in the preparation of the report?
The institutional knowledge, if you can use that expression, from condo members that have lived there either a short time or a long time, current board members, past board members, it's very important, because a lot of times by participating in the discussions with your board or in committee meetings, someone may know something about the property that someone else doesn't. And the more people that participate and the more people that provide input, the more accurate your reserve study is going to be. You know, there's a lot of history often in some boards. You know, sometimes we'll work with boards that people have been on the board or in the building for 30 or 40 years. And they can tell you oftentimes the history that is very helpful in being able to chart a roadmap going forward.
Okay, because, you know, just for an example, I know when we were doing our reserve study and we met with the person who was doing the reserve study, and the board was there, and we had a board member was going through the list and said, you know, you have this piece of equipment here, but we don't have that equipment in our building. How come it's in our reserve study?
That is a great example. And that's where, referencing back to what I said before, a lot of times the reserve study folks take some basic information about the building, they type it into a software program, and out the other end comes, it's magic, this reserve study. But that's not a finished reserve study. You still need to sit down with that document and edit it and amend it and modify it as may be necessary to fit the specifics of your building. Sometimes that's increasing funding for things, decreasing funding for things, adding things that are missing, subtracting things that shouldn't be there, or even moving things around from year to year.
And so basically, the people who prepare the reports, they start off with a canned program.
Essentially, yes.
And it has a whole bunch of items in it, and it's up to the board members to really look at their report to make sure that everything on that report is in their building or is part of their long-range planning for capital improvements and for regular maintenance of the building.
That's right. And if you stop and think about it, you know, the folks that put these reserve studies together, they maybe visit your building once every so many years, once in their lifetime for some buildings. Some buildings have one reserve study and they just keep editing it in-house all the time. So, you know, through no fault of their own necessarily, they don't have the data. They don't know the building like somebody that's there day in and day out, or somebody that's been there for many years. And that's why it's just in the example you just gave is a great example why somebody that knows the building should participate in editing and modifying the reserve study so that you have a healthy roadmap financially for the future.
And what the reserve study does is it basically tells you, it goes through your building and it says, well, you've got carpeting and you've got elevators and you've got the painting and you've got these plumbing repairs that have to be done. And they figure out how long the useful life of all these equipment, the equipment and the carpet's going to last 7 years.
That's correct.
And it has to be replaced. And 7 years from now, it's going to cost you X amount. That's all in this report, so that every year when you look at your reserve study, it says, well, this year, these are the things that should happen. But that doesn't mean that they will happen. It's not set in stone. It's up to the board to determine, oh, well, we think our carpets can go another year.
That's
so
right.
We're not going to do them this year.
That's right. That's
and
right.
And you put them off and maybe do something else instead.
But the key there, what you just said, is to defer it for a year, not to take it out of your reserve study.
Right.
And this is a critical mistake that a lot of boards make, is they'll say, oh, well, we don't need to do our carpet right now. Let's just take that out of the reserve study. And innocently enough, they intend to put it back in, but then the board changes, the thought is dropped, and somewhere down the road, 5, 6, 10 years down the road, somebody realizes, oh, we don't have carpet in our reserve study anymore. And now you have to put it back in, but you've got to replace your carpet and you don't have the money. So you're making some great examples. I'll tell you a couple of other examples with respect to reserve study. When we get asked to look at reserve studies, we're doing exactly what I would do at my own board. And that is to sit down and ask tough questions. So I look at things like where things are structured from year to year. So a great example is I'll see concrete spall repair this year, let's say, and I'll see painting of the exterior of the building 3 years from now. But that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense for a couple of reasons. One, if you do spall repair on the exterior of your building and you don't paint it, your building is going to look like it's got some sort of disease. It's going to have pock marks all over the building. that's going to devalue your property. You don't want that. So you really need to think about painting your building at the same time that you do the concrete repair. So that's a good example. Another example is where I'll go through and I'll look at different funding levels for certain things. So I'll hear board members will say to me all the time, well, hey, right here in our reserve study, it says we're going to spend X for this, so that's the budget. And I feel like an oncologist sometimes. I have to deliver the news that it's like, well, I appreciate that your reserve study says you've got this much money, but it's really in today's market conditions going to take this much money. And don't shoot the messenger. I'm just trying to help put you on a healthy track forward. And often reserve studies are severely underfunded.
And one of the reasons for the reserve study and why it is in the statute required by all condominiums is so that when it comes time to do a repair, there's money for it.
That's right.
And you mentioned earlier about replacing the pipes in a building and how nobody had it in the reserve study.
That's right.
And here we have buildings, high rises that are 30, 35, 40 years old, and their pipes are going.
That's right.
What does it cost to replace the pipes in a high-rise building? Ballpark.
It varies from building to building because it depends on the configuration of the building. It depends on how old the building is and whether or not there's asbestos in the building, hazardous materials, how many stacks of piping are in a particular unit. But I am saying currently, on average, around $30,000 a unit to replumb the drain, waste, and vent piping in an existing building.
So you're talking about millions of dollars.
Millions and millions of dollars.
And if you don't have it in your reserve study and all of a sudden you decide that the pipes are so far gone that now you have to replace it, what does an association do because they haven't saved the money for this repair?
Well, first and foremost, as a board member myself, I know that we basically have three mechanisms by which to take care of our capital improvements. One is through regular contributions. Well, that option is out the window in the example you just gave because you didn't save the money. You can't fund it through regular contributions. So now you're basically...
You're talking about maintenance fees.
Regular maintenance fees, that's
Right.
correct. So with that not an option, now you're basically you're faced with either assessments where you would say to your fellow owners, hey, you owe X dollars in so many days, and if you can't come up with it, sorry. Or you have to ask your fellow owners for permission to borrow money. And what we see 99% of the time is that because in the piping example, because it is such a huge expenditure, arguably one of the largest expenditures and most invasive projects a homeowners association will ever go through, because it's such a massive undertaking, almost everybody that we work with is getting a loan.
From a bank. And now's a
Correct.
good time because the interest rates are low.
Yes, this is a very good point. Interest rates are extremely low, and still at historic lows. They're definitely in your association's favor. And the local banks like to lend to associations where they might view you or me or anybody else as an individual a higher risk. Collectively, with a whole bunch of people banded together, in other words, an association, there's lower risk to the bank. So they actually, they like the association loans, and they're eager to lend.
And I think, that might be the topic of a whole different program on how you fund these
Sure.
repairs, because I think that's a whole interesting project. But anyway, why don't we go and give the listeners two examples
Sure.
As to what you do as a project manager. We've got to give me an example of a small project and how you would be involved in it. The association contacts you and say, we got this repair job for what? A roof?
Sure, we can take that as an example.
A roof repair.
Let's just say it's a small roof repair, not a roof replacement or anything that may trigger the need for a permit, but just a simple roof repair. A lot of times, when we get involved, it's really just to review the documentation that the board has assembled on their own. So, perfect example, I had, just this past week, I had a property manager in my office who brought, it's funny you should mention this, this is a perfect example. I just had a property manager in my office last week, brought in some information for a condo association, and they're doing some roof repairs. And he wanted me to evaluate these two bids, and just sitting around the conference room table looking at these bids, just from experience, I was able to start saying, oh, well, this guy left this out and this guy left this out and he's got this, but he doesn't. And, this warranty is better than this warranty and such and so forth. So a lot of times on small projects, we'll get involved just to provide some general advice or sometimes they'll have us come out and spot check the work, but not really take a real proactive role like we would on a larger project.
But you are the owner's representative on that job.
That's right. So remember, we're not contractors. That's not our role. Our job is to help the association come out with a successful outcome for their projects. And so our job is to look out for the association's interests.
But you do have experience in construction work and contracting and the like.
That's right. So personally, my background is in construction management, and my staff and most firms like mine have a staff of people that come from the construction industry. Most of us have a background in either construction management, architecture, or engineering, and we apply that knowledge to the condo world.
Okay. And so basically, you can save the association's money by basically overseeing the project to make sure that it complies with what the association wanted, and that they don't have to spend the time or effort to oversee this project.
That's right. So if you think about it, your property manager or your resident manager or both, your board members, those people already have a full-time job. Nor are they usually experts in construction and architecture and engineering. So typically we'll get involved to help guide the process forward and make sure that things are proceeding forward in an appropriate way. You mentioned that we can save money. We can, but sometimes it's not in a savings that is necessarily transparent. In the sense that people think, oh well, I'm going to be able to put a dollar value on this right now. I'll give you an example. Another example that just happened a couple of weeks ago, I got a call from a building that had done some repairs, didn't go well, didn't bring in a consultant such as myself, just went direct to a contractor, and it's a large enough project they really should have gotten some outside advice. And it didn't go well, they're in a dispute with their contractor, and they've asked me to step in and try to help solve this problem. So what we're going to have to do is we're literally going to have to roll back what this association did, fix the mistakes and the problems, and then rewind things forward to the point where they're at to be able to move forward from there. The cost of that outweighs the cost of having a project manager get involved from day one. So that's one place that we frequently are able to save associations. Another place is in protecting your interests long term through making sure you get good warranties and things like that.
Well, it's it looks like we're not going to have enough time to get into the discussion about the big project. So that means you're going to have to come back.
I'll be happy to. Just let me know when.
You're going to have to come back, and so we really appreciate you coming. And so what I think we've learned from you is that with contractors, they have to be licensed, they have to be insured,
yep.
And if they are close relatives or friends of the board members, they have to make that disclosure. Also, we've learned about the reserve study and how important it is and how board members have to be involved, and that they have to use this as a tool to manage and plan their capital improvements, and that there are companies like yours who will who will get involved and manage and oversee these projects on behalf of the board in the board's, basically do the oversight.
That's correct.
That the board is required to do, protect and preserve its assets.
You got it.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for being with us today.
My pleasure.
And I want to thank the listeners for tuning in. And next week, Richard will be back for more of Condo Insider. Thank you very much for joining us.